if you're interested in joining the live containers of the Broom Radio, then you can follow the link which will likely appear in the description for this episode, or you can ask the person who showed you how to find this episode, or you can just tag Nobu or Jimmy chat on Twitter or on Threads. And I think those are the only places where you can get to the Broom, which is where the Broom Radio is hosted right now. If you've never listened to episodes where they're like this before, A, yes, I always talk this slowly. B, it's a container that I've been holding for a while where, according to my senses, I channel a star named Sirius C, which only a minority of extant human beings believe exists. But I also refer to this star as the heart complex, or the thread of connection, or Indra Sutra, of the cosmic body, which I know as Sekhmet. And this is a container where I tend to hold space for discussions around questions which people pose in various venues, including the Broom Radio channel called Why Am I Like This? But often I end up talking a lot. And sometimes I talk a little bit, less slowly than this. I can do that too. Julie's offering, Julie would like to offer saffron, manuka honey, and salt water from the sea outside of the container. I receive. Thank you, Julie. If anybody else would like to offer anything outside this container, then I may see fit to bring it into the container. But we have two offerings of questions. One is from somebody named Adam Archetype, who's increasingly involved in the Broom. Adam has a container called Archetype Hour. And in the upcoming container, we'll be talking about the archetype of capital T, the capital L, lovers. And I can tell that container is going to be very spicy. And then the second question is from a tender in the Broom named Anna, who you might be familiar with. And I'm going to try to hold space for responses to both of these questions. And I'll start by reading them out. And I would love to hear from y'all about what comes up when I read out these questions. But the first one is, Adam says, one more question for my life consideration, What is the distinction between, open quote, astral, close quote, and, open quote, etheric, close quote, from your perspective? And the second question, which is from Anna, goes like this. What's your perspective on self-sabotage, metaphysically? And promise I'm not stalling for time, but I'd love to hear from anybody who's in the container right now, if anything feels like being offered through your vessels. And I guess while I'm waiting, I'll repeat the guarantee that I tend to repeat at the beginning of every one of these containers, which is that no contexts will be enmeshed, and contexts will be disenmeshed in this container, inside and outside of time. and that I will hold space for offerings of refinement, whether they are offered in a genteel fashion or not. That's the guarantee. So if you feel like the guarantee is violated, then please let me know, because I feel like the best way to refine is to express what's coming through, and then through reflection, determine what is no longer authentic to me in the current moment. Right now, Discord's glitching, so I'm not sure if I'm missing anything, but I'm going to pause for a second. Well, since nobody's chiming in so far, I'll say that this question from Adam for me is sort of seemingly a perennial question. What is the distinction between astral and etheric from my perspective? I mean, I feel like I've talked about it in a number of ways before, but I know that I'm unorthodox, but I understand the way that I articulate myself. So it's possible that the way I've articulated my response to this question has not been well received. And it's also possible that the places which I've articulated this question have not been places that, say, Adam has had a chance to look at. Nevertheless, I feel called to hold space for responses to this question, either from anyone in the container or from myself. And I also feel called to leave it as an open question, because I feel like we'll be coming back to it a little bit. And I'm very curious to see how the pairing of these questions, or the pairing of the responses to these questions, makes a symphony. But really simply, I'll say that for me, astral energy refers to the energies that we receive and that we emanate from the upper sea, or the upper dantian, or the upper elixir pool, which I would say is fed by the tributaries which come from the portals that we know in some lineages as the crown chakra, the third eye chakra, and the throat chakra. I feel there's a conduit between the throat chakra and the heart chakra, which is sometimes referred to as a higher heart, which I would say that my guides consider to be a distortion. But it's a distortion which allows us a lot of fun, right? So I would say that we journey from the higher heart, or what we call ama, or we journey from the space-time which is connected to by the higher heart, in order to access what we commonly call the dream realms. And I would say that in the dream realms, we tend to navigate possibility planes which are highly correlated with the material realm that we occupy in these vessels, in a way that is guided by the heart chakra, which I would say in its most refined form connects us to our etheric souls. But I would say that in its less refined form tends to end up being somewhat of an orchestration of the perspective of our etheric souls, and somewhat an orchestration of the perspective of many thought form complexes that accumulate in the heart space, which I would say tend to attach to states of disharmony, which we refer to as grief. And then I would say that this orchestration of thought forms collaborates with orchestrations of thought forms which accumulate elsewhere in our field, but particularly around the throat chakra, the third eye, and the crown. And I would say that these thought forms also tend to reflect an experience that we have either navigating the material realm, navigating the realm of astral, which are yet immaterial. And I would say that these experiences are informed by not only the experiences that we've previously collected, but also by the experiences of our ancestors in the sky that we connect to etherically, and our ancestors in the earth that we connect to, I'll just say vibrationally, just for simplicity. I'm just clearing something right now because if you've been following along with the Sharia Way book club, we've been reading a book called Hazrat Inayat Khan's Mysticism of Sound and Music. Well, that's what I'm calling it. And even if you haven't been following along with that book club, or if you've never read that book, maybe you're familiar somehow with the concept that all of reality is basically an orchestration of vibration. So to say that we connect to our earth ancestors vibrationally is in some ways not saying very much, but I would say that up until now, it hasn't necessarily been very clear to me how to talk about the vibrations with which we connect to our earth ancestors as separate from the vibrations by which we connect to the astral realm, which I refer to as astral vibration or astral energy, or the vibrations by which we connect to realms of ether, which I refer to as etheric energy or etheric vibrations. But having cleared what I just cleared, I would refer to the vibrations by which we communicate with our earth ancestors as either ancestral ki or a particular orchestration of gravitational vibration, which I think I would say that in East Asian folk medicine they refer to the medium as Jing, or like the essence which is used to like cook chi. But I'll refer to it as ATP. I'm curious if anything comes up. I'm looking at the chat. Julie says, to me, etheric energy feels primordial to astral energy. I feel like that's completely aligned for me. Thank you for supplying that distillation. Yeah, I guess I'll go a little further and I'll say that, woof! Are we going to go there? Yes. hmm So I guess I'll say that, and this is not unique to what I'm channeling, but I'll say that in East Asian folk medicine, we tend to refer to Jing in a way that includes the fuel sources that we consume from food, or what we call food, like burgers and chips, um, fruit, rice. So these are things that we call food, but for me, I would say that Jing also um, is absorbed through other foodstuffs. And then I would also say that the sex cells that our body generates are generally considered to be included in Jing. And then I would say that ATP ends up being permuted by Jing, and mostly, I'll say mostly, consisting of a processed version of Jing. But I would say that ATP is also produced using our own genetic material from our own genetic code via autophagy, via the processing of sex cells rather than body cells. In very select cases, via the processing of, what we have that is close to stem cells, which tends to come from the marrow of our bones and a few other places in the body, according to my senses. But we also produce ATP by interacting with sunlight. We also produce ATP by interacting with water. And all of these materials are encoded vibrationally, I would say absolutely astrally, because we tend to see these things. So you could say that the light of the sun in some way, whether it's being produced artificially, having come from batteries, which are fueled or supplied by burning fossil fuels or the collection of solar energy, or whether it's directly from the sun, I would say that we tend to see the food that we're eating unless we're getting really fancy and we're eating at those restaurants where they stop you from looking at anything in order to, in my opinion, pretentiously showcase the experience of eating. Or if we're really unfortunate and we can't afford to light the space in which we're eating, then perhaps we might not see the food. But I would say then, like, even if we're eating the food without being able to see it, we're most likely to have some image of the food that we're eating from having previously interacted with energy that comes from the sun. And I would say that this is astral energy. And I would also say that the energy that we absorb in the sun through all these diverse sources is encoded by the vibrations of the planets that sit in the solar plane, and also encoded by the vibrations of other celestial bodies, whether or not they sit in the solar plane or not, including stars like Sirius A, B, and C, planets like Uranus and Pluto, and quasi-planets like Ceres, and stars like Aldebaran, Capella, and Antares. And I'll say Alpha Ophiuch. So hopefully that explains what I mean by astral energy. And then to go back to what Julie said, I would say that it's only possible for us to interact with those energies if we are running ether through our bodies. So in some ways, like, ether could be considered to be like a protocol, right? So like we're on the internet protocol right now, and we're interacting within Discord, which has a set of protocols, even if they're not necessarily public or open source protocols. And you could say that Discord energy is to internet energy as astral energy is to etheric energy. And then to talk a little bit about etheric energy, I'll say that all of the celestial bodies, which I mentioned before, are also running energy not only within the vibrational frequencies of what we call the astral and the etheric, but at many different frequencies. Like I would say, they're not special because they're celestial bodies. I feel like we all vibrate or connect to vibrations which occur at frequency ranges outside of the astral and the etheric, um, including sound, but denser than sound, down to the vibrations of individual quanta, which are as small as the things that we're able to measure and even smaller. But I would say that, yeah, when I talk about the etheric energies that we run, I'm talking about energies that arise from the processing of ATP fundamentally or mostly. And you could apply what I was saying about Discord energy and internet energy to the relationship between ether and ATP, because I would say that it's not possible for us to be running etheric energy if we're not flowing with the energetic currency of the cells that we sometimes refer to as ATP, which I think stands for adenosine triphosphate, but I'm not sure, and I'm being challenged not to look it up right now. And as I said before, etheric energy connects us to our sky ancestors and mostly comes out of the heart space, which in our bodies is also referred to as Indra Sutra, or pearl of the thread, or the pearl of connection. And I would say that this is not the only way that we connect to sky ancestors, because as I was saying, sky ancestors also, as celestial bodies, also emanate energies, like, from the beginning to the end of the frequency spectrum. But I would say that through Indra Sutra, we connect etherically in a way that our heart spaces have been cultivated to interpret as intelligible, right? So I guess the analogy that I'll use right now is, yes, if you're in the sun and you have your eyes closed, like you're going to see some sunlight through your eyelids, especially if your eyelids are pale or like, thin. And yes, your body is also going to absorb that energy, and depending on the makeup of your body, you may be converting some of that energy to ATP through the separation of the water molecule. But otherwise, there are many parts of the body which, for the most part, are pretty much unresponsive to certain bands of frequency of solar energy. And I would say the same for most of our body when it comes to etheric energy. I would also say that the eye can only see certain bands of solar energy or light. Like most of us can't see ultraviolet light, but butterflies can. And I would say that the same is true of the heart space or Indra Sutra. What is as being limited to a certain band of frequency of the all that is also applies to the heart space, such that the heart space is open to a certain collection of frequencies of the all that is, which I call etheric energy. And I would say that this is the most cosmic way for us to communicate with our sky ancestors. And there are some exceptions to that, but it would take a long time to explicate. I guess like some other differences between astral energy and etheric energy that I want to point to right now for responding to the question is that we perceive, just like we perceive etheric energies through what I've been calling Indra Sutra, I would say that we perceive astral energies through what I call Indra Kala. And Indra again means pearl, and Kala means time, Kala. And I feel like it's probably okay for me to say roughly that what, a layman might make of my understanding of the metaphysics of the dynamics of Indra Kala as it pertains to projection and reception of astral energy is that our sense of time as something which is quasi-linear comes from the way that astral energy is processed by Indra Kala, which is again subtle organ, which arises from the mutual intelligence of the physical apparatuses of the throat, mostly the third eye, the brain, the ears, the eyes, etc., and the crown, and all of the physical organs which support those subtle organs. And then, of course, accumulation of chords or thought form complexes or energetic incursions that connect us mostly to thought form complexes or thought form complexes in other people's light bodies also interfere with this orchestration of intelligence. However, I would say that all these energies end up being processed as something which resembles or is somehow compared to an experience which could be called linear in time. It is adenosine triphosphate. Looks like it has a phosphate sword, apparently. So I guess I'll pause there and see if anybody has any thoughts on what I'm saying. Anything to clarify or add? I really hope that my audio is coming through clear this time, because last time I was talking about the metaphysics of celestial body discovery and naming, and a lot of it came through very choppy, which is really unfortunate. Or maybe it was fortunate. I'm not sure. We'll see. Intrepid Bodies. Coda says, it sounds like the astral is connected or channeled through electrical channels. Am I understanding that accurately? I mean, when I refer to electricity, I would I would say that I'm okay. I don't think so. I don't think that's like accurate to my understanding, because I think of like electrical energy as energy which comes in a particular form. It's like electricity can move through wires, and when it's moving through wires, I would say that electricity arises from a certain mode of communication between the material in those wires, mostly the electrons. So heat, or these electrons are excited in particular ways, which are usable as electric current. And I would say that like astral energy is different to this, but then I'm wondering if it's exclusively channeled via a dynamic that could be called electrical. And I feel like the answer for most people will come when I would know, because I feel like it's possible to transmit astrally without that registering on any device which might be called electrical. I feel like that's kind of like the most apt common time thing to say. Um, mm, Hoda says, I see. Maybe I'm reducing the chemical process of making ATP to an electrical process. Ooh, that's juicy. It's so interesting to like just tune into, I'll say like give yin to the context that you're setting with your yang, because you know mostly I would say I know that like especially like between the two of us we're always like transmitting like outside of the formal. But I'm reading something that you're transmitting formally or materially using thought form complexes, and then as I fill those contexts with yin, all this other stuff comes in, and then like trying to fit it to these thought forms, I don't know, it's like trying to get ants to fill a shoe. Yeah, so Julie says, I mean, charges are definitely involved in making ATP. ATP is definitely involved in our ability to produce ether. Ether is definitely involved in our ability to channel astral energy. But that's only like how we channel astral energy. And I don't think that the way that we channel astral energy is the only way that astral energy is channeled or connected, if that makes sense. I'm like being very specific, almost nitpicky. Intrepid Buddy says, that's what I was sensing. Can you say more about that? Are you responding to what Julie said or what I said? Feel free to unmute, please. I feel like I'm being nitpicky to what you said. But, I think like we're sort of like going back and forth about this theoretically. So I guess I'm called to ask if there's like a practical application which is influenced by whether or not astral energy is connected or channeled through electrical channels. It's like if it was yes, this would change how something is applied or whether it can be applied or not. And if the answer is no, that might mean something different for a specific example of practical application of astral channeling. I mean, like practically speaking, I would say that humans are not going to be in the dream realm in a way that's connected to humanity if they're not producing ATP. um, I feel like spirits which have contact with humans can interact with the astral without being connected to human vessels which rely upon electricity to channel astrally. They can also do it through other vessels which rely upon astral energy, um, which is channeled via electrical dynamics. I don't know why this is so funny to me. I feel like it's probably really, really neckbeardy for a lot of people, but I'm running with it. I don't care. I'm just gonna like tune into the space time in which Adam asked that question and see if like there's anything to cover. Oh yeah, I was talking about sort of like practical differences between astral and etheric energy. Yeah, I would say what I was trying to say, I guess, is that um, astral energy we tend to interact with um, like in ways that are sort of like templated on a linear idea of time. I would say that we also tend to interact with astral energy in ways that are templated upon experiences that relate to form and symbols, whether symbols are like letters or numbers or like characters from cartoons or not. And I would say that in counter to that, when we interact with etheric energy, I would say that it's outside of, you know, yeah, it's completely unrelated to the template of linear time. I'll say that we tend to interact with etheric energy in ways which are completely unrelated to the templates of form or symbol. However, we may interact with etheric energy in ways that lead us to have experiences that we process astrally, right? So you might follow your heart to McDonald's, and then, you know, you might order something from the machine and the receipt might come out and say 333, and then you'd be like, ooh, here's a Mercury number, I was born on the Mercury day, and blah, blah, blah. And I would say, like, as soon as we follow the impulse of our heart to start having those experiences in the material realm, in the worlds of form, and as we're having thoughts about the experiences that we're having, we're interacting with astral energy. But I wouldn't say that we're interacting with form etherically, if that makes sense. And it says this aligns, invokes the fuck it we ball emoji talisman. Are y'all ready for me to move on to Anna's question about self-sabotage from the physical perspective? That I would say is still anchored to Red Star Green Cloud or Sirius C or the heart complex of the cosmic body of Sirius, I mean Sekhmet. And it says, at first I was like, astral and etheric are too similar for me to discern. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think like when I first started to nitpick at, you know, like the way that the word astral is used, I would say like almost in a way that tends to be like conflated with like the unseen. I was like, this is strange. And I don't think it's completely wrong to say that when we're interacting with astral energy, we're interacting with the unseen, because often the way that we interact with astral energy may be seen by us, but may not be seen by other people, right? So like I might have a gift that I want to use in response to what you're saying, but I might not be able to find that gift, so you never see it. And you could say quite rightly that I'm interacting with astral energy and I'm interacting with something that's unseen to you. But I think it's also worth pointing out that a lot of people don't consider like inner vision to be related to something they see. I'd say that most people don't consider like claircognizance to be related to things that they see, but I would say that we tend to process claircognizance through interaction with concepts which are formed based on experiences in realms of seeing, like dream realms or waking dream realms. And I would say that those concepts tend to be articulated based on thought forms, which are based on symbols, which are mostly seen. I mean, I would say even if you're in a cave and you're tracing letters that are written on a wall in the cave, you're making a shape. And in order to make sense of that shape, we have to call upon faculties of seeing, whether those faculties of seeing are applied to external phenomena or internal phenomena. And yeah, I would say that etheric energy is all unseen, whereas I wouldn't say that all interactions with astral energy are unseen. Um, Please agree. I'm really curious about this nitpicking little morsel of interaction because I feel like A, like nitpicking is usually used in a pejorative way. B, I don't feel like we were using in a pejorative way. C, it feels important on some level to be talking about these things at the level of detail and articulation that we're talking about them, for me at least. And no one's jumped off the call. So maybe I'll feel like it's like at least important enough not to jump off the call. Or perhaps you can't find the hang up button. But this is, I'm going to agree in 3 to 5 days. It felt like a level of specificity that's new but necessary. Yeah, I feel like, I wouldn't say that like the way that we're talking about these things is necessarily directly applicable to, say, empirical study of this phenomena. But I feel like it's a tool that could be useful in application to empirically studying phenomena. I feel like it could be. I feel like it's a tool that could be useful for discerning how people articulate their experiences so that we can interpersonally verify different characteristics of phenomena. Julie says, especially in a realm that loves to name things. I mean, yes. I'm just going to say yes. Because this realm and its love for naming things is really painful for me, I would say, a lot of the time, because um, I think there's like 2 ways to look at it, and I was very curious if I was going to like talk about this because I kept hearing the word archetype, and at first I thought I was going to talk about archetypes, and then afterwards I thought I was going to answer a question by Adam Archetype, and then now it seems I'm going to talk a little bit about archetypes. But yeah, I'd say, whew, I feel like there's a way in which names refer to categories of things, which make it difficult to talk about those things accurately because those things don't only belong in the categories that we gesture at using names. They also belong to other categories, right? So, like, I am a man, I'm also an animal. Um, and, those things could be said to be taxonomically hierarchical. Hierarchical, yeah, that's a word. But I am also a sound. And I would say that animal and man and sound are also hierarchically linked. Mm. I feel like I'm trapped in a logos where everything is like archetypically hierarchically linked to sound. um, However, I would also say that there's a way in which names gesture at ideals which could be considered platonic. But I would say that platonic ideals don't necessarily manifest materially. I would say that they exist on a higher plane of consciousness from which the world of form descends. However, I would say that most of the names that we use don't gesture at those ideals or archetypes. So I feel like there's this dual meaning of archetypes where in like archetypes in quotation, I would say we're mostly referring to categories that we place forms in based on their alignment with the common time definitions of those names, ignoring their misalignment and often ignoring their alignment with the characteristics of other categories that we gesture at with names. And that's archetype in quotation marks. But then I feel like there's an archetype which is outside of quotation marks, which I can't gesture at without using the name archetype. But hopefully you'll get the sense of what I'm putting into the container. And I'll say that those archetypes are actually primordial forms which become differentiated and mingle in order to create the world of material form. However, we can't really gesture at those archetypes accurately with name. And I would say also that those archetypes end up being distorted by other forms and symbols that we use to define them. And this is part of why living in a realm that loves to name things is painful for me. So I want to like go back to Anna's question about self-sabotage from the physics perspective. And I realized I've only got about like maybe like 8 minutes. But I hope that, I mean, it's not clear to me how what I've been talking about so far is necessarily the best way to lay the table for a meal, which involves dining upon responses to the second question, but I trust that at least some of the components of what was shared previous to the response to this question will be useful in either digesting the response to this question or preparing the response to this question. Does anybody, there's anything coming up for anybody with a response, in response to this question? Having like listened or partially listened to what I said or what other people said in the chat in the prior 55 or 6 minutes of this container thus far. On self-sabotage, yeah. I mean, says Anna. I feel like what's coming up for me is like, what does it mean to sabotage oneself? And I feel like it's impossible for me not to see that self is not a unit. Yeah, Anna says, I imagine it has something to do with what orchestration of cells someone is connected to. That feels precise. There's a question mark there, but it was hiding behind a button. But it services, in my opinion, as a statement. Yeah, I guess like that feels coherent with what I was saying in the sense that I don't feel like self is a unitary phenomenon. I feel like it's an orchestration of fragments. And so it's impossible for me to countenance the concept of self-sabotage without seeing that some fragments of self are in conflict with other fragments of self. And I'd say that there is probably a constituency of self which is strong enough to feel like, let's say, the self that is being sabotaged by the other constituent of self. that question. Julie says, an image that's coming up for me is like a rug being pulled from under something abruptly. And it says, this is how the experience of self-sabotage often feels for me. So I guess I'll say that for the most part, let's say in that example, or the examples that are being gestured at metaphorically via that image, we're probably going to be thinking about the version of self that I tend to call self-conceptualizing self. It's like the self that emerges from self-concept. And since talking about concept, we're necessarily talking about orchestrations of self that arise in the bands of frequency that we refer to as astral. And therefore, we're talking about an orchestration of self that arises from the mutual intelligence arising from the apparatus of physical forms that we often refer to as like the brain and the eyes and the ears and the throat and all the things that are in that part of our body. It's not completely accurate. So like I would say that's usually like the leading actor of any gender in an orchestration of self. And then I think question is like, question gestures at, for me, like what aspects of self which are not included in that self-concepting self might sabotage that self-conceptualizing self, and how might they do that? So I feel like earlier, I'm just going to use this because it feels aligned and convenient, which is really convenient. I was talking about how following our heart might lead us to McDonald's. And you could say, okay, like many people self-conceptualizing self might consider themselves like really basic if they went to McDonald's. And I would say that, yeah, somebody might order something from McDonald's and feel like they were self-sabotaging by eating McDonald's. Because there were aspects of self which orchestrated one to move to McDonald's in a way which is in conflict with the self-image of the self-conceptualizing self that arises in the upper chakras. I'm going to say a little bit more and also hold space for other people to respond to the last thing that Anna said before I read it out as well. But yeah, like I said, the way that we follow our heart is very subject to etheric interference. And it's also very subject to interference from other energies that are connected to our light body, mostly via disorganized energy or ruptured energy. It becomes that way because of trauma and conditioning. I think heart discernment is a lifelong journey. I don't think many people or any people could accurately say that in following their heart or following any other part of the orchestration of their self, that they don't end up having experiences that give them opportunities to reflect upon distortions that arise due to ruptured energy. Because I would say that being in a human body is highly karmic. I would say that our bodies have been conditioned and formed, I want to say, phenotypically. I'm going to like jump here and say genetically and epigenetically by echoes of karmic incidents, aka ruptures. And so as long as we're in human bodies, we're going to be encountering karma that we can either release or sometimes we don't have the capacity to release. And now I'm going to read what Anna said. What do you all think about drawing a connection between what we call psychic attack and what we call self-sabotage? Intrepid Body says, that's what I was thinking. Like how connected this answer might be to the response from the last question. And yeah, I think like I was sort of gesturing at and like painting in broad strokes what I refer to as interference, what I referred to and refer to sometimes as interference between our energy body and other energy bodies. And I'll say that that interference is in some form psychic attack most of the time. I don't think that we always exchange energies in ways that are violent on many different levels of being, right? So we may end up having encounters where we take on the energy of other beings and not just like resonate with them, and not just like become contoured by our interactions with those energies, but actually become entangled with or enmeshed, I should say, with those energies in ways that are violent from one perspective, but can be considered aligned from a vaster perspective. And I wouldn't necessarily call those attacks. However, I would also say a lot of psychic attacks are agreed upon at different levels of being. But to bring it a little bit closer to your question, Anna, I would say that at some level, all self-sabotage is a result of psychic attack. But I don't think that when I say that, I'm really using psychic attack the way that a lot of people use it. But hopefully you get what I'm saying. I feel like a gap that wants to be closed there is just like explaining in this context what I feel like people probably have very serviceable, probably even superior explanations than I have at this. I think the question that arises out of this gap is like, what's the difference between my energy and somebody else's energy? And I guess the way I feel like answering that question in this context is that when I refer to my energy, I'm referring to the vibration that arises from the cosmic functioning of my body. And I think in that sentence, the word cosmic is sort of like undefinable. I feel like from any point that we are experiencing in, we can be moved into timelines which render experiences that brought us to this point as cosmic within the timelines that we move upon. But I'll say that the energy that arises from the functioning of the body on a timeline is our energy. And then the energy that we connect to cleanly via our sky ancestry, which is also a physical body at a different density of perception. The energy that we connect to via our sky ancestry cleanly through the orchestration of the energy of our physical bodies in this density of perception. I would say that's my energy or anyone's energy. I would say that the astral energy that we interact via this orchestration of energies is not our energy. I would say it's energy that we perceive and then encode within our physical bodies and our metaphysical bodies, which doesn't belong to us. Does that make sense? And then I think some of the corollaries of what I'm saying are that if we are completely authentic, or we're only interacting with our own energy by the definition I laid out above, then our interaction with astral energy is going to be cosmic, in the sense that we will only think things that are cosmic for us to think. We'll only see reality and interact with reality, which is, for me, itself an orchestration of astral energy. When I'm talking about material reality, we'll only perceive that material reality and interact with that material reality in ways that help us navigate towards cosmic timelines. But I have to say that this is an object of faith. I don't think that it's possible to determine materially whether something is cosmic or not. I feel like it's something that we can only discern upon, you could say, immaterially, or you could say that what's cosmic or what's true or what's right is purely and arbitrarily a matter of perception. And I would say that what tends to be labeled as cosmic or right or true arises from interpersonally verified perception. And I'll say it is done. Fita, it is done. It is done. Imhotep, it is done. It is done. Maria, it is done. It is done. Sophia, it is done. It is done. Diana, it is done. It is done. Hermes, it is done. It is done. Jupiter, it is done. Does anybody have anything to add to what's been offered so far? Or what hasn't been offered yet? Well, thank you for listening to the December 15th episode of Why Am I Like This? Thank you for listening to the Broom Radio. Julie is typing something. Julie's digesting. Well, I'll say that if you would like to digest publicly, whether you are Julie or not, I would say please don't digest through Julie if you're not Julie. I would say please join us in the Broom. Please don't digest through anybody else. But please feel free to talk to me or anybody in the Broom about these things. If you're not in the Broom, or you don't have the @the-broom role, then you will have to ask for it or wait for somebody to give it to you intuitively if you want to digest this in the channel called Why Am I Like This? But otherwise, I'm sure if you rub your brain cells together, you will find some way to talk about this with us in ways that don't interfere with anybody else's field. And thank you once again. I hope this was beneficial in some way which may not align with your idea of cosmos, but aligns with the cosmos's idea of itself. And I'm going to ask Craig to leave now. And I'll say good night. Happy Mars Night of Venus Day. Peace.